What do you think? Are we good to go?
Yep, we're good right now. Off you go.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to, what is it, episode 162? I can't remember. Anyway, we have a fantastic weekend lined up, an ode to spring, where we celebrate both trees and all the critters that live around trees. And don't forget, today it's Earth Day. So we're even more especially delighted to start with trees, the fundament of the universe, or the fundament of the world, fundament of life. But before we move on to that part of the feature, let me first introduce my co-host, Cassandra. Cassandra Atherton is an award-winning prose poet and international expert on prose poetry. Her prose poetry is widely anthologized and has been translated into Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. Cassandra has published more than 30 books and is currently writing an illustrated book of prose poetry on the Hiroshima Maidens with funding from the Australia Council and the Victorian government. Cassandra co-wrote prose poetry, an introduction out from Princeton U Press, and co-edited the anthology Australian Prose Poetry. She's commissioning editor for Westerly magazine and professor of writing and literature in Melbourne, Australia.
Thanks, Mark. It's so wonderful to see everyone again. I've missed everyone. It's been like over a month, so I love to see your faces again. So I mainly write about sex, so it's a bit tricky to find something on trees, but I'll go for it anyway. So this is more, it's got an apple in it, so that probably is the closest I'm going to get. It's called Cox. It's about the Melbourne Cup, or it refers to the big horse race we have here. We actually have a day off in Melbourne when they run a horse race, which is terrible. And we'd very much like to stop doing that, but it's been going for such a long time. So this is called Cox. It's COX rather than the other way. You say you are almost ready to breed Cox's orange pippins with me, planting the seeds of a future together. Sweet apple branches reaching into our corner of the sky. I imagine our cider-drunk love, your buttonholes full of apple blossoms creeping up your lapel. I am thrilled to the core, but that gives you the pip. You want to train thoroughbreds for the Cox plate, a stable of champions reared on Cox's orange pippins, and your buttonhole will be stuffed with the fat tutu petals of a Cecile Brunner rose that I pick for you at Moonee Valley on race day. But I won't be gay to your Robbie. We won't have a fine cotton affair. My heart is as big as Phar Lap's, but you have a bird cage for a rib cage, and your heart only fancies a flutter at the track. Arrhythmia, tachycardia, the beating of the hooves down the straight. So I sit with my back to the track at the bistro while you order warm apple crumble and take a gamble on our future. Now I would like to introduce the brilliant Mark Vincennes. We've all missed him. We've missed the bio. You're going to have to get the rustiness out to join in at the end. Mark Vincennes is an Anglo-Swiss American poet, a fiction writer, translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He has published over 30 books of poetry, translations, and fiction, and including more recently, There Might Be a Moon or a Dog with Gazebo Books in Australia, 39 Wonders and Other Management Issues, and The Pearl Diver of Urunmani with White Pine Press, getting fabulous reviews. Forthcoming collections are A Splash of Cave Paint with Spite and Dival, and The King of Prussia is Drunk on Stars with Lavender Ink, and a chapbook, An Alphabet of Last Rites with Chavina Bava. Mark is also a prolific translator. He's translated from German, Romanian, and French. He has published 11 books of translations, most recently An Audible Blue, Selected Poems 1963 to 2016 by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist, I know you remember his name is Klaus Mertz. His own work has been translated into many languages, including Japanese, Chinese, Russian, French, Italian, Romanian, Greek, German, Icelandic, and Pig Latin. He is currently working on a novel entitled The Age of Occasions. Vincennes is editor and publisher of the brilliant Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. Here we go. It's been too long. He has lived all over the world, from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born in Matilda Hospital on the Peak in Hong Kong, but he now lives on a farm in rural Western Massachusetts, overlooking Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain, Melville's inspiration for Moby Dick, where there are more red maples, sweet birch trees, and witch hazels than people. So he's gone thematic. I love that about you, Mark. Could you read something for us? You have a whole brilliant manuscript of No More Animal Poems.
I'd love to. And yeah, this poem does come from the collection that I've just finished writing called No More Animal Poems. It begins at the root of the tree. And so this poem's called We Are Wurzel Root. Little is known of our function, our grand intention. Some speculate that we are the origin of the species, or perhaps we are the mathematical equivalent of something once glimpsed in the quantum. But we don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. Let us begin at the beginning, I wish to say, but I mean the end. Here at the end, where time serves no function except for minor incidental sojourns as the mind wanders through dale and hill and valley, through the flux and flutter of an array of images and sounds and flavors believed to be associated with the self. Yet, we were created from nothing, so how can we be so self-important? All I know, the root next to me says, Your Majesty, I am so honored to be your secondary root. Honestly, I abhor this aggrandizement. But of course I say, each of us serves his purpose, my child. How could they know what it is to be an oak or an elm or even a thicket? The communion with Our Lady, the sun, from the spurs to the shoots, the exquisite boughs to the oh so elegant seven-fingered leaf fronds. How could they know? So I twisted myself in motion that day through the oh so lumpy soil and faced him square on with my wurzel root eye. And he whimpered and snarled simultaneously as if consumed by hunger, but devoid of taste, which he was, of course. I said, I am conjoined with a central nervous system. You are merely a tributary, but thank you for your tribute. And thus, I shall pass on the microphone to my esteemed guests tonight, Jennifer Barber and Fred Marchant, who edited Tree Lines, 21st Century American Poems, an anthology of poems about the importance of trees in our lives. And they will introduce several of the anthology's contributors. But first, we hear a poem from each of them. And briefly, their bios. Jennifer, her most recent collection is The Sliding Boat Our Bodies Made from WordWorks. Her previous collections are Works on Paper, Given Away, and Rigging the Wind. Jennifer served as editor-in-chief of the literary journal Salamander. She was based at Suffolk University from 92 to 2018. Among her favorite trees are oaks, copper beeches, and Japanese maples. She is the current poet laureate of Brookline, Massachusetts. Fred Marchant is the author of 5 books of poetry, most recently Said Not Said, which was published by Grey Wolf. Grey Wolf also published his collections Full Moon Boat and The Looking House. His first book, Tipping Point, won the 1993 Washington Prize from the WordWorks. In 2002, Dedalus Press of Dublin, Ireland, brought out his collection House on Water, House in Air, and new and selected poems. And thanks so much for organizing this event. And I thought to myself, when you guys approached me about this, it's perfect, because I was thinking about doing this weekend on Ode to Spring, and then you just guys came with your tree lines, which just fit perfectly. Are you there?
We are now unmuted.
I see.
Good. I'm Fred. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, Lit Balm community, for sponsoring and for this weekend, this whole Rite of Spring for the weekend. our plan is that I'll do a kind of general introduction of the anthology, and I'll read a poem, and then I'll hand it over to Jenny, who will also talk a bit about the conceptual structure of the book. And then we'll introduce alphabetically our readers, and we'll basically be using the beautiful bios in the back of Tree Lines. So let me begin. Let me begin with a bunch of thank yous, by the way. I should thank Vinnie Connors, the publisher at Grayson Books. She got the idea right away, and so her vision, her sense of the importance of this topic is something that I can't help but continually thank her for. I want to thank also the artist who did this cover. It's a friend, a woman named Netta Goran, an Israeli painter, and one never knows how paintings are going to work on a cover. This one works absolutely to the T, and right to the heart of the matter. I also need to thank our respective spouses. We have 3 editors, Jennifer Barber, Jessica Greenbaum, and myself, and we all need to recognize the fact that we have partners who had to really live with a lot of this work and all of the paper that it generated. And I want to say just a small moment of specific thank you to Jenny Barber. The idea for this book was Jenny's. She had it, and she talked to Jessica Greenbaum and myself, and of course we got it. We understood what she was saying, but it was her idea, and so that too I sort of don't want to ever stop thanking. Let me describe now a little bit of what we did. We established editorial parameters. It was the time of the first year of the pandemic, and we were really sort of stuck. We couldn't you couldn't even go to libraries, if you remember that. And we wanted to make a book that had 21st century poetry in it. That is to say, written by poets who were alive in our time, and would speak to our present tense experience. But what we did is that we made a decision early on to take advantage of our predicament of the pandemic. We decided that we would investigate everything we could find online and in our personal libraries. And that's how and out of that, we started culling poems that we loved. And we met every other week for a couple of years, actually. And we printed out reams of poems. We talked, we laughed, we disagreed, and we required that we needed a consensus on each of our poems we decided to use. When you look at the book, you'll see Jenny Barber's introduction, and she'll speak a little bit about that. But I just want to sort of take a little moment and do an etymological flip with this. One of the most interesting etymologies that I've come across is the etymology of the word tree in English. It comes down through the Indo-European branches of language, and the linguists think that its root is a collection of syllables, D-E-R-U, deru, I guess. And just to think for a minute, when you look in the dictionary for that root, of the words that come out of it, words like durable, words like betrothed, words like trust, and above all, words like true. The word true has a cousin relationship to the word tree. And I find that to be, exactly the feeling I had when we started working on these poems, that we found in the forest of tree poems, truths that were coming to us from nowhere else. And so I hope that that our sampling today will have a similar effect for folks. There should be a way to buy this book. I think we'll get posted at the end, and so forth. And I'll conclude my remarks by reading. Oh yeah, we allowed ourselves one poem, and so I'm going to read my contribution to the book. It's called Olive Harvest. It's true. The tree has the scent of the sea, but the silver leaves, their slender fingers, the thick, infinitely twined trunk. Some riddle in the roots that lets it drink from the stones. Even the place where a limb has broken or been lopped off, the shoot that springs back to life. Stumps that burn for hour upon hour, a scattered discard twig you press to your lips. And the fruit that hangs from young branches and old, a green reddening to black. This fruit ripened on enough bloodshed and hardened human behavior to make you think it will turn away in disgust. Year after suffering year comes back as if to say, here and here and here. And let me say to Jenny.
Thank you all for coming. Is the sound is okay? Okay. Thank you, Mark and Cassandra, for hosting and sharing your poems. And thank you, Fred, for your introduction and sharing your poem. So I'll say a little bit about the 4 sections of the book. They evolved out of the poems themselves as we progressed with our collecting of them. So we didn't start off with a framework, but one emerged. The first section of the book is called Where You Are Planted, and it takes its name from the title of an Evie Shockley poem, which Ellen Kaufman will read tonight. Poems in this part of the book explore where we come from and from whom, and how differences in class, race, and regional backgrounds shape the landscape of our personal histories. The poems in the second part, One Tree, zero in on a specific tree and the poet's relationship to it. I'm not sure if Hoahwah is here yet. I hope he'll join us at some point during this, but we have a poem by him in this section, and also by Angela Torres, who will share her poem, What Isn't There, which is about a Bradford pear tree, but also about the nature of perception itself. In the next part of the book, called Calendar, we included poems about the array of seasons and weathers, and the seasons of a life from childhood to old age. These poems reflect the fact that trees are calendars, bound up with our experience of passing time. Both Ellen Kaufman's poem and Rachel Hadas's poem are firmly rooted in springtime in this section, and George Kalogeris's poem, Veil, takes us back to a scene from his childhood. The last section of the book is called Listening Telling, and it looks at what a tree or trees might be saying to us, to other trees, and the lessons that trees impart, including the psychological, spiritual, and physical need for trees in our lives. Valencia Robin's poem, Cathedral, in that section, examines happiness in the context of a sorrowful world, how the colors of the trees seem to talk aloud in the early autumn light. So I'll read my poem, Motion Harmony 2, from the anthology. And the title comes from a musical composition written by my son. And the poem describes a tree in my sister's yard. Motion Harmony 2. The pears dropped by the failing tree are pale bronze, sunlit with copper spots, rotting in the grass, riddled with wasps. By pear, I mean pear, not a riddled heart. At least I think I do. The flesh of it laid bare by the intricate, steady work of mouths. And our first reader from the anthology is Rachel Hadas. Her recent books are Piece by Piece, prose, Love and Dread, poetry, both published in the summer of 2021. And her most recent collection of poems, Pandemic Almanac, came out in the spring of 2022. The recipient of numerous awards, Rachel is Board of Governors Professor of English at Rutgers, Newark, where she has taught for many years. So please welcome Rachel Hadas.
Hi, everybody. Jenny, I've actually retired, I'm happy to say. So I'm a professor emerita. I'm delighted to be here. Lit Balm, Cassandra, Mark, thank you. And I want to say this is a wonderful anthology. We've all enjoyed many anthologies of poems, but thematic anthologies run the risk of being repetitious. I remember reading an anthology of poems about fairy tales, and after you've read 25 poems about Little Red Riding Hood, you begin to feel that's enough. But this book is beautifully conceived and organized, as Fred and Jenny explained, and it's also a wonderful showcase of styles as well as sensibilities. I'm going to read my little poem, Forest and Trees, which is on page 110, if you have the book. And then I'll read one poem, one other poem from the book. And if there's time, I'll read one other, but we have a long afternoon ahead of us. So I don't want to do too much. I wanted to thank Fred and Jenny for very graciously visiting my class at Rutgers online, and the students were very moved. They tend to come from New Jersey suburbs, so trees meant a lot to them. So, Forest and Trees. Pacing the grayish green corridor of a May long as the slowest childhood, I brush aside the drooping boughs to reach a veil of intricate and ramifying ways to find you, or to lose you. I forget. Were you the habitat through which all this cool spring I strode? I left no stone unturned. Each leaf might signal hidden life. I tramped up every glistening avenue, threaded the season's maze as if there were a destination I knew, as if I'd reach a goal when I broke through the stubborn undergrowth and clinging mist, forgetting you inhabited all this, forgetting all the greenery I so impatiently brushed aside was also you. And Ishian Hutchinson, a wonderful poet who grew up in Jamaica and now lives in the States, teaches at Cornell, has a poem also in the same calendar section called Moved by the Beauty of Trees. And I think you have to think of a very young child staring in wonder up at a tree. The beauty of the trees stills her. She is stillness, staring at the leaves, still and green and keeping up the sky. Their beauty stills her, and she is quiet in her stare. Her eyes' long lashes curve and keep. Her little mouth opens and keeps still with its quiet for the beauty of the trees, their leaves, the sky, and its blue quiet, very still and quiet. Her looking eyes wide, deep, silent, hard on the trees and the beauty of the sky, the green of the leaves. I know we're going to hear a poem by David Ferry later, and that sort of lulling use of repetition in the Hutchinson poem I just read reminds me of David Ferry, and that is a compliment. Do I have time for one more, Jenny and Fred? Or okay, so this is from Pandemic Almanac. If you remember the early months of the pandemic, wherever you were, there was a lot of fear in the air. And even though this was written in rural Vermont, fear makes its way into the poem. It's called Pine Cones. Absolute not knowing, and knowing we do not know. Halfway up the hill, behind still leafless trees, something is hiding. If my granddaughter were here, she and I would scour this path for pine cones, and tuck each nugget, each synecdoche into our baskets. Alone, I gather pine cones. Back home, I toss a few into the fire. After 70 lucky years, it is so easy to forget the rough patches in one's own story, let alone how life has been forever. War, starvation, plague, suffering, burnt out hopes, more suffering. We forget until uninvited knowledge visits, not as recollection, but fear. I meant to gather fears and bring them home and toss them in the fire. But climbing this cold hill in the hush before the whenever arrival of spring, barely a breath of wind in the pines, and the few birds left waiting, silent, suspended, uncertain what I thought to find or lose, I look for fear. It is nowhere to be seen. Is it hiding behind that slim young tree? Was it ever there? Even if it has left, will it return and pounce and strike and mock, wave its pale banner, float away again? Absolute not knowing, and knowing we do not know. Thank you.
Sorry, Mark, do you know if Sai has come in or?
No, he has not.
Okay, maybe at the end, if there's time, I'll read his poem, but for now, let's continue on. Our next reader is George Kalogeris. His most recent book of poems is Winthropos, Louisiana State University Press, 2021. He is also the author of Guide to Greece, also from LSU, and a book of paired poems in translation, Dialogos, and poems based on the notebooks of Camus, called Camus Carnet, from Pressed Wafer. His poems and translations have been anthologized in Joining Music with Reason, chosen by Christopher Ricks and published by Waywiser. Please welcome George Kalogeris.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I just want to underscore what Rachel said about the best anthologies. I think you sense that the fineness of the aesthetic that has brought the book together. And I certainly sense that with this anthology. I'm going to start with a poem by David Ferry that's in the anthology. I taught with him for many years. He's right here. He's 99 years old. It's called October. The day was hot and entirely breathless. So the remarkably quiet, remarkably steady leaf fall seemed as if it had no cause at all. The ticking sound of falling leaves was like the ticking sound of gentle rainfall as they gently fell on leaves already fallen, or as they passed them in their falling, now and again it happened that one of them touched one or another leaf as yet not falling, still clinging to the idea of being summer, as if the leaves that were falling, but not the day, had read and understood the calendar. It's my poem from the anthology is called Veil, and that's V-E-I-L. Caught in a sun shower on my way to school, I once took shelter by ducking under a willow. Its branches hung down so low, they swept the street. I was stepping through beaded curtains, thick as catkins. The rainwater glittered, running down the vines. My books in their slung green satchel stirred like seedlings. Black earth, moist roots, the bowl mouth oozing tar. I could have waited things out in the candy store, but I was shy. I was a firstborn. For years, I never knew why those elderly relatives would look at me that way. They spoke no English. Their coats were heavy. Whatever they'd been through, I stepped back out from under the veil of the willow, just as the dew was shining on everything, the houses, the sidewalk, even the dark Atlantic. I want to read another one of mine. It's not about a tree, but it's about a leaf, and it comes from a plant, of course. The basil poem is called Basil, but for me it goes all the way back to the sacred groves of Arcadia. Basil. On Sunday mornings, while we were still asleep, my father blessed the house with a basil leaf and a little glass half filled with holy water. The sprig was from our next door neighbor's garden, and the holy water seemed no different to us than faucet water, although it came from church in clear plastic tubes that looked like medicine bottles when they were filled with light on the kitchen sill. Most times I'd wake up just in time to see him pass down the hall, dipping the sprig in the glass as he sprinkled every doorway in the house, repeating something in Greek I couldn't follow, some phrase he muttered quickly under his breath, each time the sprig would break the water's surface. And then I was seeing through a glass so clearly, even the veins of the leaf stood out from a distance. Before I knew it, the whole house smelled of basil. You could count your blessings in the sunlit dew, cast off so lightly, but never nonchalantly, by the leaf in his right hand, as if you were struck by the morning glimmer, left on everything the water happened to touch, drawing a bead on the dilating bead that brightened the bureau's brass handle and kept you focused on the here and now, until the later date when the priest would perform the very same ritual all over again, but this time stopping at the threshold of the altar where the sleeper refused to wake. Do we call the glass half empty, or is it half full? The answering voice breaks off between the verses. Basilico. My tongue curls back on its stem like a wet leaf, companion to low chanting. Do I have time for one more, Jenny? One more short one? I'd like to read one that's an homage to David Ferry, and in particular to his great American poem, The Aeneid, The Golden Bough. Maybe every poem is a golden bough that leads to the poet's shades, or at least a lyric offshoot of its leafy, original gleam. Maybe every poem is a prayer to Venus, awaiting the flutter that signals her doves, alighting at the mouth of the Sibyl's cave. Maybe every poem is the ancient passport we need to embark with the sallow faces and steerage, seeking the father of the bloody family tree. Maybe every poem is every poet, returning through the ivory gate of dreams, forgetting they ever drank from the jet black river. Maybe every poem is the golden bough, or at least a flicker from the tears of things, metallic shimmer of the continuous present. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George. Our next reader is Ellen Kaufman. Ellen Kaufman runs daily through the majestic trees of Riverdale Park in Upper Manhattan. She is the author of House Music and Double Parked with Tosca, both from Able Muse Press. Her poems have appeared in Epoch, Southwest Review, New Yorker, Yale Review, and elsewhere. After many years reviewing poetry for Library Journal, she now reviews for Publishers Weekly. The poem in the book celebrates a famous cherry grove in suburban Maryland. Ellen.
Ellen, you're muted. Ellen?
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yeah, could you start again?
Yeah, I didn't really say anything except, can everyone hear me now?
Now we can.
Okay, Fred, thank you so much. That it was a familiar introduction, but thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm so happy to be included and to have my work in this very fine anthology and to be a part of this venture. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to start with my my poem that's in tree lines. It's in the calendar part, and of course it's right on. It's we're at that point in the calendar here in New York, although we're suddenly having a rainstorm, and I think all the cherry blossoms will come off. But we've had a beautiful cherry blossom season here. This poem was a cousin of mine took me to this neighborhood in Maryland, where it's like a little suburban cul-de-sac, and everyone comes at cherry season. It's just filled with cherry trees, and all the cars line up and they go round and round and round this neighborhood for like about a week until the flowers fall off. And you can't, it's so thick with cherry blossoms that you can't even see like who's underneath them. So this is called The Cherries of Kenwood. Gaze down these pink tunnels into deeper pink. The walls are blossoms fashioned of smaller blossoms, attached to raised arms that nuzzle other arms. It's like watching a parade that poses while I parade. Random sprays liven up the trunks, remind me to look up at where naked limbs used to be, where the road used to be, melted ice cream. A girl pedals through a puddle of petals. Thank you. And now I'll read this poem that Jenny mentioned as being also where the title of this first section is taken from. This is by Evie Shockley. It's a pretty amazing poem called Where You Are Planted. I think it's a ghazal. I think, if I'm wrong, let me know. But instead of using the rhyme, and she really uses the repetition here beyond, I used repetition in mine, but this really does it. Instead of repeating the rhyme, she just repeats the same phrase. And then there are some other words that repeat as well. So this is Where You Are Planted. He's as high as a Georgia pine, my father'd say, half laughing, southern trees as measure, metaphor, highways lined with kudzu-covered southern trees. Fuchsia, lavender, white, light pink, purple, crepe myrtle bouquets burst open on sturdy branches of skin-smooth bark, my favorite southern trees. 100 degrees in the shade, we settle into still pools of humidity, moss, dark beneath live oaks. Southern heat makes us grateful for southern trees. The maples in our front yard flew in spring on helicopter wings, In fall, we splashed in colored leaves, but never sought sap from these southern trees. Frankly, my dear, that's a magnolia, I tell her, fingering the deep green, nearly plastic leaves, amazed how little a northern girl knows about southern trees. I've never forgotten the charred, bitter fruit of holidays, poplars, nor will I. It's part of what makes me Evie. I grew up in the shadow of southern trees. That's pretty amazing. I mean, there's just the repetition gets more resonant as it goes on. And I'll just finish with something, a short poem, a newer poem from me. It's another seasonal poem. This is about apples that are on a tree and what happens to them sometimes if they stay on the tree and then there's a frost or winter comes. It's called Ghost Apples. Ghost apples. I'd never seen a ghost apple until a field of them went viral. The photo stood for them the way the ice stood for the apple. Once the rotting flesh had melted itself a hole to fall out through. The ice apples held the light because they didn't hold the apples. It was a particular kind of presence, the hollow kind, that kept repeating without saying much, an appleness lit by absence. The sun had made it as the sun had made the apples. Sun made them and sun took them away, I presume, although I didn't see that part. The way I see them, they are always there and not there, the same way that I see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Next is Valencia Robin. Valencia, are you unmuted?
I am now.
Okay, great. Valencia is a poet, a painter, and a recipient of an NEA fellowship. Her first collection of poems, Ridiculous Light, won Persea's Books, Lexi Radinsky's first book prize, and was a finalist for the Kate Tufts Discovery Award, and was named one of Library Journal's best poetry books of 2019. A Cave Canem Fellow, she holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Virginia and an MFA in art and design from the University of Michigan. Valencia, welcome, and please take the mic.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Fred. Hi, everyone. So wonderful to be here. So great to be reading with so many folks whose names I know, but now I get to actually meet. Big time thanks to the editors of the anthology and to Lit Balm. Yeah, this is wonderful. I'm going to read my poem from the anthology and then a poem by Linda Paston, who I just learned passed away this January. So I'm really glad I'm reading her poem. My poem is called Cathedral. Not that I needed reminding, but even the trees like giant awestruck afros grown in the laboratory of a mad brother, the nerdy Nerudian of my dreams, who somehow isolated the colors of all the saddest love songs in the world. Baby, baby, red, and please, 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 yellow. Yes, even the browns are talking to me. The greens, blue, and this early autumn light that makes everything shout. And where's my hopeless agnostic when I need her? Foreseer of endless wars and sorrows? Is that her running toward that old abandoned church cathedral of shadow and grass? The leaves above trembling like tambourines, two happy squirrels dancing down the aisle. And then a poem by Linda Paston, Vertical. Perhaps the purpose of leaves is to conceal the verticality of trees, which we notice in December as if for the first time. Row after row of dark forms yearning upwards. And since we will be horizontal ourselves for so long, let us now honor the gods of the vertical. Stalks of wheat, which to the ant must seem as high as these trees do to us. Silos and telephone poles, stalagmites and skyscrapers. But most of all, these winter oaks, these soft flesh poplars, this birch whose bark is like roughened skin against which I lean my chilled head, not ready to lie down. Then I'm going to read a few, just maybe a couple of other poems. I have a lot of tree poems, and I haven't read many of them at reading, so this is kind of fun. This next one is called After Graduate School. After graduate school. Needless to say, I support the Forsythian war against the dull-colored houses, the beagle deciphering the infinitely complicated universe at the bottom of a fence post. I should be gussying up my resume. I should be dusting off my Protestant work ethic, not walking around the neighborhood loving the peonies and the lilac bushes, not heading up Shamrock and spotting Lucia coming down the train tracks. Lucia, who just sold her first story and whose rent is going up too. Lucia, who's moving to South America to save money. Lucia, cute 20-something, I wish wasn't walking down train tracks alone. I tell her about my niece teaching in China, about the waiter who built a tiny house in Hawaii, how he saved up, how he had to call the house a garage to get a building permit. Someone's practicing the trumpet, someone's frying bacon, and once again, the wisteria across the street is trying to take over the nation, which could use a nice invasion. Old growth trees and sea turtles, every kind of bird marching on Washington. If I had something in my refrigerator, if my house didn't look like the woman who lives there forgot to water the plants, I'd invite Lucia home. Enjoy another hour of not thinking about not having a job, about not having a mother to move back in with. I could pick Lucia's brain about our circadian rhythms, about this space between sunrise and sunset, ask if she's ever managed to get inside it. The air, the sky, ethereal is all get out, so close and no ladder in sight. And then I'll end with this little poem. First walk of the new year. Little wiener dog doing his best show horse, jumping 1, 2, 3 stumps in a row. His boy is too busy scrolling to notice, but I smile all the way up the hill. Bitter cold, yet this curious stand of trees with green leaves, not magnolia, not holly. A man's walking boot tied to a no trespassing sign. A brown kestrel high on a branch, spreading her wings, the shock of cloud color underneath. I think of the conversation last night, 4 women in the kitchen eating popcorn and olives, how quick I was to roll my eyes, say who has time, as if love was a second job, as if joy could wait, as if my heart was the kid on the phone and not the little dog. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Valencia. Thank you also for remembering Linda Paston. Our next reader is Angela Narciso Torres. Angela, you might as well unmute now too.
I did.
Okay, great. She is the author of What Happens Is Neither. It's from Four-Way Books, and To the Bone from Sundress Publications, and Blood Orange from Willow Books. Her recent work has been in or forthcoming in Poetry Northwest, and Prairie Schooner. She was born in Brooklyn, raised in Manila. She currently resides in San Diego and serves as a senior and reviews editor for Rhino Poetry. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you, Fred. Such a pleasure and an honor to be here today. And thank you, Jenny, and also Jessica, for including me in this masterfully curated anthology, along so many poets that I admire, including the ones we heard here today. I'd like to say a special thanks to Mark and Cassandra of Lit Balm for giving us this lovely space to celebrate our love of trees and words today. I'll be reading my poem from the anthology, which Jenny mentioned earlier, about a Bradford pear that grew outside my window when we lived in Chicago. We are in San Diego now, but watching that tree throughout all its seasons, I was struck by how much particular beauty it had throughout all the seasons, whatever the season. And I wrote this when in the late fall, when all the leaves had fallen. What isn't there? Even without leaves, the Bradford pear keeps its bell silhouette. Above a commonplace moon, somewhere between half and full, waxing edge rubbed like the worn edges of a lucky quarter. A sentence partly erased, brightness that might have been. And then we moved to Florida. And when we lived in South Florida, I was just so happy to be around the tropical foliage that I grew up with in the Philippines. It was so familiar to me. Indeed, a palm tree is the muse of this poem. It begins with an epigraph from D.H. Lawrence, which I'll read after the title. Harvesting the Heart. In Florida, I shall eat a palm seed and see if that'll grow a new heart for me. And this is from D.H. Lawrence's letters. Indeed, swallowing a seed seems the better option. For stealing the palm's heart from its solitary stem is back-breaking work and spells certain death for the tree. The part you can eat, also known as swamp cabbage, lobster of vegetables, burglar's thigh, lies deep in the woody bark, just where the fronds start. You'll need a machete to work down the trunk, stripping layer after jagged layer, each the weight of a small child. Some give up by the third or fourth, but near the core, the flesh is tender, drenched in sap. You'll be surprised, despite how much bark you've skinned, knuckles raw, fingers splintered, the sheer size of that heart. Then I'd like to read another poem from the anthology, this one by Diane Seuss from her book, Frank Sonnets, in which she writes sonnets in the style of Frank O'Hara. And this resonated with me because at the college I attended in Manila, there was this favorite bench I would sit on during breaks. The bench was in the middle of this big grassy quadrangle and faced this huge acacia tree that's probably at least 100 years old. And I would sit there between classes to find just a sense of peace and quiet. It was my bench and my tree. It was like a sacred space. And I feel like Diane Seuss captured so much how trees force us to be quiet when we pay attention. From this bench I like to call my bench, I sit. From this bench I like to call my bench, I sit and watch my tree, which is not my tree, no one's tree, the quiet, except for barn swallows which are not loud birds. How many exclamation points can I get away with in this life? Who was it who said only 2 or maybe 7? Bishop? Marion Moore? Either way, the world is capable of quiet if everyone stays indoors, and no jet planes. My tree, it just stands there in the middle of everything, in a meadow, on the bay, looking what Barthes called adorable. Then I drove the mile west to the sea, which had decided to be loud that day. The sunset, oh, ragged and bloody as a piece of raw meat in the jaws of some big golden carnivore. And I cried a little, for none of it will last. And I'd like to end with a poem from my recent book, What Happens Is Neither, in which trees make a cameo appearance, but a particularly important one. In this poem, I wrote about my mother, whom I lost to Alzheimer's almost 4 years ago now. Wow. What happens is neither the end nor the beginning, yet we're wired to look for signs. Consider the peonies. One makes a perfect bud after months of nothing. Another's leaves are ringed with black rot. How can I not say end? How can I not say beginning? Leaves fall when days shorten because a tree must reduce to its tough parts: twig, branch, bark. My mother sweeps away the daylight. She nods off while chewing a spoonful of fish and rice, her head a peony gone to seed. Father calls to say she doesn't recognize him. Turning to him, she cried out, certain a stranger was in her bed. He played his violin till she slept, a leaf in late fall curling into itself. In autumn, chlorophyll disappears, canceling green from leaves so yellow and magenta can blaze. In my mirror, I see her, the smile that favors a cheek, eyes slanting in the shape of small fish we eat for breakfast. Trees know best the now of things. What goes on has been going on for centuries. Washing dishes, I rest a foot on my standing leg. A fork clangs on the tile. I rinse a cracked cup. I try not to think of endings. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you. Jenny, I don't think Sally is here, as far as I can tell.
I don't think so. So I'm wondering, Mark and Cassandra, what your preference is. If we should do a short Q&A, or if you'd like to get on with the open mic, I'll leave that up to you.
No, I absolutely think you guys should do a short Q&A. You know, let's initiate the process. Fred.
Yes. Oh! I thought you were gonna. I think you were gonna cue me. Yeah.
I kind of did, but you know.
Well, Jenny, I hope you agree that we're eager to hear what folks would be curious about about putting. I mean, like, let's start with this one, a really big, broad kind of question. It is Earth Day, right? And there is, I think, in our opinion, something sustaining about thinking about trees, and these poems actually, produce that kind of thought, and in ways that you haven't, for me anyway, in ways I haven't thought about those trees before. In fact, today's readings themselves sort of had that feel to them, that, oh, I never quite thought of a tree that way, and so suddenly, my own sense of the ecological and spiritual crisis of our time involving climate is just a notch, the dial is turned up just a bit. And I'm thanking the writer at that moment for that. Jen?
Yeah, I've been listening to these readings. It's so wonderful to hear additional poems by contributors to the volume. It's really eye-opening. And I think really makes that point of how central trees are. When we started this project, I think it definitely was a pandemic endeavor. And I think I've always loved trees, but I saw them more as scenery. And something about the pandemic and taking lots of walks where I live just really changed my view of trees. And I see that reflected in all of the poems read today, that just the intimate relationship between the poet and the trees that they're observing, and how deeply they enter our lives. And I want to thank all the readers for their beautiful readings of their own work and other poems from the anthology. If anyone in the audience has questions for particular poets, please feel free to, Mark, is it easiest if they put questions in the chat or just shout out?
I mean, yeah, put a question in the chat, shout out, any initial question for.
I'm going to put a little footnote on what Jenny just said too. Jenny, I hope that it's okay to say this, but you know, one of the nicer things that happened among the three of us as editors during the working on this is that Jenny started taking photographs of trees and on her phone and then sending them off to us. And then I think we all started taking photographs of trees, you know, and for all good reasons too, although each of them different reasons. But I think I wonder in the audience how many folks are, you know, are taking photographs of trees. I mean, cherry blossoms, of course, right? I have trees that I keep looking behind me, behind my house. They keep the bare branches keep looking like you know, the wiring of the brain. It's really stunning when you start making those kinds of, so all those neurons are out there in the world, right?
Yeah, exposed this time of year, but just before the leaves come back.
Exactly. I think
Great question.
It was
We've
so.
got a question in the chat.
Oh, we have. What do we got?
Brilliant. DeWitt has said, who would be your favorite poets or trees from earlier times? Rilke in his elegies, ? Do people want to talk about their favorite tree poets? Is that mean calling them tree poets? I think it could be exciting to call them tree poets and make the tree sexy.
Jenny, do you, I mean, does that ring any bells for you?
Well, I would say working on this book, just, you know, there are a lot of poems about trees that aren't in this book from earlier times, from all over the world. And that had us thinking how fun it would be to do a collection of poems in translation, in English translation, from poets everywhere. But I think once you're attuned to the subject, when you come across another tree poem, all your antenna are up, and it's a very intense and wonderful experience.
Yeah, it's also should be said that we really did. We spiritually disciplined ourselves to wear 21st century blinders. And so that, you know, anytime anyone said whose woods these are, I think I know. No, that's the, or, you know, so, and there's a vast amount of poetry in English, you know, around the world, in the English speaking world, in which trees appear. And so you know, DeWitt, that's a tough question off the top of my head. You know, who are some of the most important tree poems from my life? I have to think more about it.
A great tree poet is Robert Frost. He has a wonderful poem that begins, I wonder about the trees. And he has a poem called Tree at My Window. But I think many poets have some wonderful tree poems, and not necessarily all of their poems are about trees.
Right.
The other thing I was thinking is how to put this, that the older I get, the more I feel like poetry is a shared experience, that somebody else's use of a pronoun like he or she or I hardly matters, that we understand that they're speaking in some way for us and to us. And the shared human experience of trees is very strong in this book. So whether it's George's poem about Basil Vasiliko or a poem about cherry blossoms or whatever, we absolutely get it. The other tree poet in a slightly creepy way is Ovid. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, people are turning into trees. Sometimes it's not a great experience, but it is sexy. And Daphne turns into a laurel tree, which is Daphne because she's being pursued by a god and she wants to be rescued. So turning into a tree, she is protected from being raped by Apollo, but the tree still trembles. Ovid is very good on fingers turning into branches and so forth, and bark covering up people's mouths. It's a remarkable series of transformations he talks about. And I'm sure there are many other poets. I can't think of any right this moment, but.
I remember one of the first poems that as a 17-year-old in college, I think it was a poet named Daniel Hoffman, and he had a poem called "Waking in a Tree," and I remember thinking that's a hell of a good poem. I didn't know any other poems, but I knew that one was good. And now that we're thinking along these lines, you know, that in Lear, you know, Edgar hides inside the hollow of a tree, doesn't he? You know,
In the happy hollow of a tree.
and that's pretty important in my psyche somewhere. I know that.
And let's not forget the whole Japanese and Chinese poetry, which is many trees all over the place, basically. You know, I think every third poem is about a tree on some level.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of Philip Larkin, who we probably wouldn't consider a tree poet per se, but I do love his poem, The Trees, which starts, I have it right here because I was just looking at it yesterday. The trees are coming into leaf like something else is being said.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
I
That
had
is
never
so
thought of that poem as a grief poem, but it is, and it's also about new beginnings. I recently came across it because I watched the movie Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, and Isabella Rossellini, who plays the grandmother of Marcel the Shell, gives a beautiful reading of this poem just before. I won't spoil the movie for you, but yeah, it's worth revisiting. Such a lovely poem.
It's a beautiful poem. I need to go, everybody. Thank you so much for this wonderful event. And every time I revisit this book, I find more wonderful poems in it, which is another great quality of an anthology.
Indeed.
So, thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rachel.
Thank you,
I
Rachel.
hope the conversation goes on. Yeah. Say hello to David Ferry, George, please.
Thank you, Rachel.
And so, Fred, shall we move on with the program, or
Sure, I think.
Yeah, I think that would be good to move on with the program.
All right, sounds good. Thank you
Fred,
so
do you
much. Thank you all so much for this wonderful reading about trees. And thank you, Fred, Jennifer, and also Jessica, of course, for making this happen. And so now I'm going to hand over the mic to my co-host, Cassandra.
Yay, it's been too long. It's been too long.
Open mic journey of trees. I hope everyone's going to read a tree poem.
Mark's getting strict on us, people. We have to obliquely address trees today in the open mic. So I know you can do it. I know you can do it. I have entire faith in John Wessick, who's up first, because he's always so fun to have on first.
Okay. Well, this one is called A 9-Year-Old Boy's Poem About Flowers. Crocuses fire tomahawk cruise missiles loaded with CBU-87 combined effect munitions that scatter hundreds of bomblets over mom's precious hyacinths. Daffodils open like radar dishes on S-300 surfaced air missiles, but sorties of killer bees blast them with AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles that home in on transmitters at speeds over Mach 2.0. Before Primrose's launch Scud missiles in retaliation, Scrub Jays swoop in like A-10 Thunderbolts and pepper them with depleted uranium rounds from their 30mm GAU-8 rotary autocannons. Once Allied forces achieve air dominance, hummingbirds hover like AH-1 Cobra helicopter gunships ready to fire chin-mounted machine guns at columbines and bluebells. Then M1A1 Gophers roll in to mop up survivors. Except for snapdragons. Snapdragons are cool. I hate pulling weeds in the garden.
And that's how you do it. That's how you be an amazing poet. John Westick, you are incredible. I've missed the enthusiasm and the voices and the killer bees and the primroses launching Scud missiles. Thank you so much. You kicked off in a beautiful way, our open mic. Next, we have Leslie, who always has something beautiful to offer us. So Leslie, please unmute and read your oblique tree / nature / environment / Anthropocene poem.
Hi, Cassandra, and hi, everybody. It's so great to be back with Lit Balm, both to see you all back and to be back myself. My tree is not oblique; it is standing up straight. And actually, I just want to say that I wrote this in the second spring of the pandemic when I was living in DC, and Karen Newberg and I, who is Karen's on the reading, we're writing together via FaceTime. So this is actually dedicated to Karen. It's called Prayer, and the epigraph is from Galway Cannell. Oh, only universe we know, forgive us. The wide branching tree, 3 times the size of the house it overshadows. A tree still I cannot name after staring at it for 25 years. That tree has no detail because it just looks black against the sun setting in back of the trees, in back of the leaves that in 1 week have appeared from bare limb to bronze bursts and then fall back to ground, an increasingly blue sky, drifts of gray inflected cloud receding to leave shine all over the evergreen magnolia at its side. Oh God, I really can't write any more about this because whenever I see the radiance of the setting sun, the aureole, the nimbus shining precisely midway from the bowl, my extraordinary fortune in knowing my friends, that I know their love, their patience, their giving, bursts over me, blinding me with thankfulness. Universe, as long as you are here, let me rest in you with gratitude.
Wow, thank you. That definitely wasn't an oblique tree. That was an upfront tree. I love a tree I still cannot name after 25 years of staring of it, and your increasingly blue sky was beautiful. But I'm also loving the magnolias today. I'd forgotten about magnolia trees and how beautiful they are, and it's been great to hear about some of them today. Thank you. Thank you so much, Leslie. Susie, you're up next. What have you got for us, Susie?
Hi, my name is Susie, and I'm a Zooglossia Fellow. This poem was published in Wishborn Words as Refuge or Refugee. I found them in a pile of bodies, so many still alive, all mounded in a quadrant pile, the sector of decapitations to the southwest. I took who I could in a hasty moment, filling the transport in minutes. For the first few hours they rode in the sun, making of an ordinary Sunday. Their first night they slept in the 5 containers in which I had smuggled them, still open to predation. And so this Monday morning, a crisp, bright day, they began the housing. Those who don't like the Arctic storms of climate disruption went under established bamboo native to a Midlands now called China. I tried to keep their apparent tribes, some genetic similarity, some hope of an uncontained life. If they can negotiate a Florida oak already rooted a decade, the obvious child of the stately elder across the fence. We rest a spell to scrawl and stretch the spine. There are still the Mediterranean ones who look to have been well housed. Their oblongs are still intact. They will go to the garlics and the holy basil, their cousin. But there's one hybrid exotic, well endowed, and two cast into the mound of bodies left to die under a tree surrounded by tractor tire tracks and near a land again now flooding.
Wow, thank you. That was
Thank
really
you.
powerful. Read beautifully as well. The uncontained life, so interesting. And I took who I could in a hasty moment, such a heartbreaking moment. And we have garlic and basil's back, and I'm going to be Australian and say basil instead of basil, but you know what I mean. So yeah, hybrid exotic, you had everything. Thank you so much, Susie. I really loved that piece. Very powerful. Next, we have Karen. We know Karen. We know she's awesome. We have expectations, Karen. What's on next for you?
Hi, thank you. It's so good to see you and everyone. And this has been a beautiful reading with one of my favorite subjects, trees. This poem does have trees in it, but it's not just about trees. It's called Let Me Sing the Garden. Let me sing green and stroll the garden, collect the yellows and purples, bathe in the luxury of butterfly and bee. Let the hummingbirds hum the afternoon light. Let the fireflies light the blue hour. Let me sing. Let me sing the garden. Let me be a tree. Let me reach into the song of the seasons. Let the seasons keep their pace, steady in promise. Let the promise be a garden. I'm lost in a dream with no garden. I'm lost in a world where green is lost, where creatures are lost, some who we never met or named. Let me sing the garden, sing the birds, sing the flowers. Let me sit in the crotch of a tree. Let me be a nest.
Wow, I'm so glad that I built you up because that was awesome. It was beyond. I love the singing. I love the Let Me Sing Green and the bathing in the luxury of butterfly and bee. What an amazing poem. And I'm so glad you put the blue hour in. I kind of think the blue hour is one of the most beautiful things in the world. So I loved that moment. You're awesome, Karen. Thank you. Now, DeWitt needs no introduction other than he's incredible. He's in his chair. He's back. We've missed him. DeWitt, you're going to have some wordplay for us today, surely.
Actually, I'm going to read On Trees, which is in my new book.
Handy.
This is for words. Though some of us hug them as thick-skinned, long-lived cousins, as shade and shelter makers, CO2 breathers, windbreakers, though we have hearings for them when they become troublesome, though we love their tossing and wind seas, their birds in song, their fruits, berries and nuts, lumber, fuel, pulp, and sweetened sap, though we harvest and welcome evergreens in parlors for holidays, though we plant trees in orchards and nurseries, though we love to climb, swing, and build houses in them as children, though we wonder at their upward thrusts, contortions, and twists, though we're dazzled by their fall colors, count and read their rings, even play them as records. Though naturalists praise the model of collectivism through tangled roots, where enzymes warn an oak of a new parasite attacking a nearby birch or maple, and even deeper, the continental root mass serves as a kind of vegetable internet. Though our ancestors once dwelled in them for safety, though we celebrate them on Arbor Day, still, we have our fears and fantasies. What if they could move? Like Burnham Wood to Dunsinane, or Tolkien's ants attacking Saruman for military industrial deforestation. What if they have souls? What if, when we pluck their fruit, they cry out and rebuke us? What if they are nymphs fleeing harassment like Daphne and magically transformed? What if the bough breaks? What if we can't get down? What if roots give and trunks topple, crushing us below in cars or in our beds? The standard Nordic noir film opens with a flyover shot of solid treetops stretching for miles, beneath which savagery and sin are hidden. The heart's forest, Dante's, Hawthorne's, Freud's. Friendly wolves lie in wait. Paths are crooked and misleading. We're on our own, no rescue near. We're not out of the woods yet. The growth of trees mimics the evolution of species, according to Charles Darwin, with higher, newer branches replacing those below. Forms, fungal, vegetable, and animal, are all related by common descent. So we, in families, begin with common ancestors, connect to sibs, cousins, aunts, uncles, generation after generation, grands and greats of kin, until we find ourselves in progeny where branches end. And at the Bible's root, there's paradise and knowledge's tree, tempting our first parents with mortality. A God blink later, someone weaves a rope, adds the hanging tree, appoints the hanging tree, adds bitter fruit.
Wow, what an ending. What an amazing piece. It's an epic on the tree. You know, you had my Shakespearean heart at Dunsinane. So I was so there. That was dazzling. And your anthropomorphic trees are amazing. Thank you for sharing such a brilliant poem. Amazing duet.
Thank you.
Next, we have Elka. Elka is Cindy's friend, so we love her already because we love Cindy. So Elka, what do you got for us?
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Thanks. It was wonderful to listen. And I have a poem that I wrote last fall. I'm now in Brooklyn again, but I'm also spending time in Washington State. And this was inspired by our immediate surroundings there. Bliss of change and constancy. It is happening again. First nudge in late August, eager, tired maple leaves, calmly sailing to the ground. Oh, so yellow, yet spotted with their big green eyes. Alders more reserved, even in October, delicate fading green-yellow shading amidst persevering family clan. Once in a while, ready to let go, showering down in small groups of the like-minded, always audible first, then gently appearing to the eye. Soul proud trembling poplar, risen up behind the boulders, surrounded by its court of maple trees, composing an impressionistic symphony on slender body. A few aging cedars, turning golden brown at their tips, like lace gloves for the fall dance ahead. The Douglas firs asserting themselves and us. There will always be evergreens to carry us through the darkest of seasons.
Wow, that was gorgeous. It was so incredibly visual. I love the spotted with their big green eyes, but mostly I agree with you. It's an impressionistic symphony. The whole poem, I think, this is an impression. Thank you so much. That was really brilliant. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Tony, I have you up next before our before the Cindy and Bob team that always finishes the Lit Balm Open. So Tony, what have you got for us today?
Thanks, Cassandra. Thanks for fitting me in. Yeah, I've got a poem called Clearing, which is in my first pamphlet. It's called Lucidities. So the poem, yeah, it's about trees clearing, and also, and I'm getting ready to move from the house which had the garden. So it's a saying goodbye poem called Clearing. I've heard the invisible river of trees, watched the sea of leaves, waves crash to field. I'll miss these garden trees, their abiding, their ease with birds, perch for soul. I've watched them long, quite rooted, even when wooden to my woodenness with legs, still, more in silence, deep core to word gone core. They stayed. No, some did not. Willows weeping done, now stump.
You're
Some
sucking my
apple
toes
too.
after this, bro. I don't want any excuses. You're sucking my toes, bro. I don't.
Rhododendron scarred, a blight in the air, poison breathed, transmuted into knots by this branch of earth slung. Gnarled heartwood stacies, pearl growth, fire risk. Now I must unroot, wander, entish, replant in new ground, hoping to be amongst birds and trees, even bees, to watch and know them, share in my gaze this long dream of gardens, apple, pine, willow, rose tree, bird shelters, standing their song.
That was an absolutely gorgeous poem. I'm sorry there was a short interruption there, but we did hear all of the beautiful images. The Invisible River of Trees is one of the most beautiful openings to a poem. I really loved that, Tony. And good luck with the house move. I find house moving so traumatic. So I wish you all the luck with that.
Gone. Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
That was really fantastic. We love having you in the open. Thanks so much. Next, as I said, we've got our team, our brilliant team. Cindy, badass poem or badass poet from Brooklyn. What do you got, living room?
Oh my God. After all those beautiful, serious, important, and vital tree poems, I have a very silly, juvenile rhyming poem because I do not write poems about trees or spring or anything like that. So please indulge me here. I'm embarrassed to read this, but in my defense, it has an alliterative title. Ode to Spring and My Stuffy Sinuses. I'm allergic to pollen.
No, don't suck my toes right now. What are you doing?
Just hang on a minute, and we'll.
I don't know where's that?
Brooklyn is about to.
One of you got. Can you chuck that person out?
I chucked him out.
Thank you. I think I might have to. Is there extra security we can put on? Just don't let anyone in, please. Is there any dodgy looking people still around? I'll check them out. You can't, we've got to have Cindy's poem without any interruptions. It would
We're
be
all
unfair.
dodgy looking, Cassandra.
Yeah, I know that's tricky to work out who to chuck out just by by this alone. Cindy, please start again for us. I'm excited for your ode to spring and your stuffy sinuses.
I actually think he should interrupt this poem.
I don't know. I like the stuffy sinuses.
Right, here we go. Ode to spring and my stuffy sinuses. I'm allergic to pollen and ragweed and grass. Brain fog and fatigue are kicking my ass. I'm allergic to chocolate, boo-hoo. And sometimes I swear I'm allergic to you. My eyes swell up at the drop of a hat. My sinuses clog at the sight of a cat. My post-nasal drip could fill a large vat. And you can't say this poem's nothing to sneeze at. Joyce Kilmer, he's another one that we didn't mention. Joyce Kilmer opined that only God can make trees. Then why the hell can't he banish my spring allergies?
That's what we needed. That was awesome, Sin. I loved it. You better never be allergic to me, though. No one else can write about post-nasal drip like you, Sin. No. We have our last contributor coming in from his kitchen. We haven't seen his kitchen for a while. I'm hoping the dishcloth is in the same spot. Bob, you always give us something at the end of Lit Balm to take away for our day, or my day and everyone else's evening. And I'm so excited to hear. Is it going to be information? Is it going to be something else? You can never tell with Bob.
Thank you. It's information, and it's not a tree poem, but a tree does make an appearance.
I think that's fine. That's an oblique tree poem, rather. I think that's totally fine.
Information. In the spring, the owls bloomed and the wheels turned more slowly. In the spring, the woman's hair reached all the way to the sea. In the spring, there were bears singing and a tree that finally opened its eyes.
And that's why you want Bob to be last, because you're going to think about that all night. You're going to dream about that. We should all have a Bob to follow us around each day and give us those little bits of information to make our day better. Thank you, Bob. I noticed your dishcloth is no longer striped. It's a plain one this week, but I'm excited it's still there on the bench. And I hope we'll see you tomorrow, because how would we go about our day without another piece of information? Mark, it's over to you for the close of a really brilliant show.
Yes, thank you so much, Fred, Jennifer, and Jessica, for such a wonderful show. And thank you, Alan, Sai, Angela, Rebecca, Rachel, Valencia. And yeah, it was just a wonderful show. And the open mic was great. And tomorrow we have Ode to Spring Part 2, which is Critters, which includes John Kinsella, Anne Elvey, Martine Bellin, Helen Ivory, John Wall Barger, and Alice Petway, and a couple of interesting other things. So do come by. And on Saturday, May 6th, we have Caroline Haggood, James Tate Hill, and Melissa Ostrom for a more usual show. This one is focused on fiction. But do join us for that. So to close, I thought I'd read a little poem that would kind of segue us to our critters. And especially since the last poem referenced bears, I thought I'd read a bear poem. And the poem's called Thus Spake the Other Bear. We scrounged and scavenged in a frenzy of rinds and skins and fatty substances scraped from the bottom of an oily plastic bag, but that melted in the mouth and infused everything with a shimmering front palate umami. Toyo says once there were other bears here on our island, and they swam like sea otters from crag to outcrop, and they dined on roe and the flesh of their trout mothers, who in all their spawning had plenty to spare. And the others perched above the most compact yet luxuriant waterfalls and slashed the trout as they leapt upward, spring-bound to their maker. But of course, the others would say the fish they devoured still lived on in the forest and within the creek, down the valley and out into the vast ocean, where we shall all finally sink. And someday, with good fortune, they too shall serve up some as yet unknown species, a dark, sticky, liquefied sun. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this Earth Day. Thank you, Mother Earth, for being here. And thank you for poetry and for trees, for celebrating Mother Earth. Love you all. See you tomorrow, hopefully. Yeah. Cheers.
See you tomorrow for more
Yes.
shenanigans.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.